I'd like to turn it over to my panelists to introduce themselves and give you some background on their experience.
Thank you very much. Very thrilled to be here. My name is Shweta Jain. I am a managing partner at IBM Consulting in the risk and compliance practice. And prior to joining IBM 3 months ago, I was with UBS for roughly 7 years, looking at the regulatory risk and enterprise risk topics. And prior to that, I was with PwC for 16 years in their risk and compliance practice. So been doing risk and compliance related discussions for a long time, and thrilled to be here to talk about what technology is doing in this space for transaction monitoring.
Hi everyone, very happy to be here. I am Avner, working for eToro. It's a global broker-dealer, retail focused. Almost 10 years in the RegTech space. Used to work for a company called Capitec who did trade reporting globally, got purchased by the S&P Global. And for the last 6 years or so, leading in eToro the RegTech surveillance department, covering a wide variety of compliance solutions for business activities such as marketing campaigns, communications, trading, money in, money out transactions, and KYC, which is the topic we're going to discuss today. So very, very happy to be here and have the chance to share my knowledge.
Great, thank you for that. Before we get into AI and transaction monitoring, I think it's important to kind of level set. What do we mean by transaction monitoring? And what was transaction monitoring before the world of AI? Maybe you guys could walk us through that.
Yeah, so first of all, it's important to mention that AI, it's not necessarily a new thing. It exists, I think, since the 80s, if I'm not wrong. And machine learning by itself is pretty much matured and well used in this industry for I think at least like 1 or 2 decades. What is very new, it's of course the language models, the ability to add reasoning, the ability to analyze unstructured sets of data. And I think it opens tremendous opportunities for efficiency, for wider coverage, for better understanding your landscape. And this is truly amazing and evolves so quickly. So in high level, that's the kind of differentiation I would make. Yeah.
Certainly, I certainly agree with that. I think to go back to your point, right, on what is really transaction monitoring and what are we talking about here, transaction monitoring has existed as a baseline requirement for a very, very long time for financial services and in general as a way to better manage risk. That, I think, is a very key point. It is ultimately about compliance and risk management. And that's where I see transaction monitoring fitting. It doesn't exist in a silo. It has to be a part of a broader compliance framework, which works hand in hand with KYC, knowing your customers and clients, having the anti-money laundering programs in place, understanding fraud and understanding your data and all of those components. And then AI really is a tool to more effectively manage that component within your compliance program, which ultimately should support better risk taking. So it's connectivity to the business and aligning and making sure that transaction monitoring and your compliance program metrics are better informing your risk management becomes key. I think in terms of AI, the way to think about the progression of technology that we have seen, it's always been a large data problem to start with. And for that, we have seen the evolution from Excel, rule-based behavior, behavior management, which was reactive, to now more proactive measures being taken to understand behaviors, to understand patterns, to better manage large data sets. And that evolution, I think, is what we will spend some time on today. But certainly want to emphasize that, I think transaction monitoring has existed as a broader compliance framework component, and it really ultimately is there for informing better risk taking.
Yeah, and maybe we can give some very simple examples to help the audience to understand. So I would say the before AI solutions and in general automations were more about analyzing the transactions, as you say, and then analyze things manually in Excel or similar solution, and probably do a lot of manual work around the verification of the client, the screening of the client, going out to the internet, writing in Google, let's see if the address of this business is actually correct according to what got populated in the KYC funnel, or to go to search for this database in a sanctions list, or a PEP, or adverse media, etc. Today, AI can do these things. AI can search the internet and compare this client or business name to this sanctions list and already determine whether it's okay or not. That can save tons of time. And also, like the facial verification, selfies, it's also pretty new. This is a bit more mature, but back at the time, like 5 years ago or so, I think, it wasn't exist. Like people would take the document, take the photo of the person, upload it to the app, and really needed to verify. Today it happens automatically. So yeah, just to be more specific about the actual automations possible.
Great. So when you think about financial institutions, right, whether they're small broker-dealers, large global banks, asset management firms, all of these institutions have different capabilities, different resources, yet the regulatory regime is very similar, right? Whether you're a small broker-dealer or a large broker-dealer, you have to comply with the same regulations, the same rules. How do you tackle implementing AI solutions given that broad spectrum of capabilities, resources? You know, taking a step back, what is your recommendation for how to like go from a proof of concept to an implementation?
Would you want to?
Sure. So from, I think your point about the regulatory regime is such an important one, because in all of our seats, we have to deal with regulatory expectations in all aspects of our jobs. If you work for financial services, right? I spent quite a bit of my career in my seat as the head of regulatory risk, dealing with clients almost on dealing with regulators almost on a daily basis. And it was interesting because, to your point, the regulations around AI particularly are at such a juncture in the industry where we're seeing a lot of interesting new concepts, but also a learning that's coming from the regulators. You know, we sat in on exams where the regulators were asking us about our AI, rollouts in different areas, and we're very interested in how we were going about it. And it was less so about the specific rules of the road, but more about principles and governance. So I do want to talk about that for a minute, because I think it is such a crucial aspect to transaction monitoring and really a holistic compliance program where you're deploying AI technology for being able to explain, I think, for first and foremost, what are your principles? What are the guiding principles that you're applying when deploying technology-based solutions, and how are they influencing your decision making? How are you able to audit how the decisions were made? Where was technology in the loop? Where was human in the loop? And what resulted in the judgment that ultimately presided? Then beyond that, what type of governance is in place for AI? Who is reviewing, who is in seat to make decisions, and where all is AI getting embedded? And then I think most importantly, where are the controls for the usage of AI? So in that spectrum of regulations and how regulators are thinking about how to better scrutinize and oversee technology implementation, specific for transaction monitoring, if we think about going from a proof of concept to implementation, you have to take into considerations data-related challenges, which I think will resonate with pretty much everybody in the seat, right? Because who doesn't have data challenges? Everybody's dealing with data silos, data quality, system integration, and legacy systems and how they interact with each other. So having the right type of controls around those aspects is key. And then one challenge that I hear about every day is having the right talent and training, because having the right people in the seat who are highly coveted in this market, who can show management of key man risk and where you can have continuity, serves as a very important factor in taking it something from a proof of concept where you're deploying new technology to a real implemented solution that spans your entire process.
Yeah, and I'll try again to provide some more very grounded examples. And thanks a lot. I couldn't agree more. Let's assume that you go back after this summit to your organization and you saw so many AI solutions and you are excited to apply it in your area, okay? It's so tempting to come and say, wow, look, it works like magic. It does this thing that we did manually for 20 years. Look, I will show you a demo. You will love it, I promise you. It worth the money. Then on another, it's so easy to fall, allow me to say these quotes. But my recommendation is, firstly, before running anywhere, is really to try to define the very, very basic things you want to achieve. The definition of success, what are we trying to solve, can we do it internally with low budget, like simply, maybe it won't be perfect. And most importantly, I think, to map, as you said, all the different internal systems and data sources and stakeholders, because that by itself may fail the project. You may fix something in your department, but if it won't be connected to systems B, C, and D, it would never develop this value that you saw in the original demo. So to really ask very basic questions, how we want to define success, what KPIs we need to define up front to monitor this project and say if it's successful or not, then how we measure the AI efficiency and the human efficiency and compare the two, and then over time taking decisions to choose what is the most efficient solution. This is key. And I personally, and I guess many of my colleagues, tend to skip that because of the stress, because of the evolving challenges every day in our businesses. It's super important, because then, only then, after 1 or 2 or 3 years of hard work, of a lot of money and time invested, you'll be able to demonstrate the storytelling of look where we started and look where we are today. But the key to doing that is to decide as soon as possible in the process the structure and the principles of it, as you said.
Absolutely, sustainability has to be built in from the ground up.
And this is leadership. This is like not technology, not domain expertise. It's just to plan ahead strategically and to be very assertive about it. No, we're not running anywhere until we define our goals, how we're going to measure it, and whether it's feasible in terms of internal permissions, resources, collaboration by other teams that are must in order to achieve this success.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So for example, I sit on my firm's AI working group, and the AI working group is made up of, well, myself representing kind of the legal and compliance and regulatory side, as well as folks from operations, risk, technology, the investment team. What's the right approach? In other words, who do you guys see driving the AI implementation process? Is it more from a technology development side? Is it more the users saying, hey, I need an AI solution, and calling the developers saying, please, how do we get this? What's in your experience?
That's a great follow-up question, because at least in my experience, I encountered these blockers in the organizations I work for, and no one is doing it in purpose. Like, no one is saying, no, I'm going to fail this project because I don't like Avner. It's like just because this department is too busy with other challenges. So I think the one who requests it is always the second line, the policymakers, the compliance teams, and let's bucket it together with the risk teams. I think it goes together. They should come and say, we have this risk, we have this regulatory obligation, we need you guys to build something that would cover that. Secondly, you have the user, you have in my case, the internal provider, so the curation of the technology or the development team that does that, and you have the users who needs to operate this solution. In my view, at least, these 3 pillars must be aligned and ready to collaborate upfront in order to make it successful and efficient.
I fully agree. I do think that it's not an either or. It's certainly all departments have to come together to get any project, for this type of an objective to be successful. But very interestingly, the title that I have been seeing pop up the most in my feed, and be interested if everybody has been experiencing this, is this title of Chief AI Officer. especially at the larger and mid-sized banks. I see this as a title increasingly, and have had the opportunity to engage with a few over the last few weeks. And it's very interesting. Every time I ask them, what exactly is your job description in a statement or two, generally the words I hear is bring together different stakeholders, align responsibilities and objectives so we're not stepping on each other's toes and using our resources appropriately. But then most importantly, it's so that we're connecting the solutions so they're not siloed. And that I really found interesting, because in the context of transaction monitoring, you can build very good advanced tools to really monitor transactions. But if you do not connect them to your broader KYC, AML program, and really back to your first line, then you kind of have missed the forest for the trees. And that's where I see that role, that leadership role that we were talking about, as very paramount. If you have somebody in that seat who's sort of playing the orchestrator for all the departments to align their goals and their objectives, then the pathway to implementation becomes that much easier. But that leadership has to be balanced with the right incentivization and the right type of collaboration between risk, compliance, technology, the risk takers. The first line is paramount, because if the first line is not engaged in the objectives of the second line, then there ends up being a difference of how the implementation ends up.
And it evolves over time, right?
Exactly.
It's not like one time, let's meet all together and we are good. It's an ongoing, everlasting, evolving kind of architecture that you need to maintain and redesign and redevelop, and it's super important. And I think I'll again give a very pragmatic example of the challenge in my organization. We are a multi-regulation, multi-asset class, high volumes, 3.56 active million users. Just imagine, we offer crypto, we offer stocks, we offer debit cards in some jurisdictions. We have 7 different regulations in Australia, Singapore, Europe, UK, US, etc. Just imagine how challenging it may be to calculate a holistic risk score for this client. This client has one payment account, another crypto account, another stocks account, and you somehow needs to bring for example, from the crypto analysis, Chainalysis, for example, vendors like Chainalysis, to bring the risk score from there. And then client due diligence and suspicious activity monitoring, such as, I don't know, Nice Actimize, or like other ones, Unit 21 or other vendors. You need to bring it from there. And then there is, by the way, some AI's new type of vendors, I would say. Greenlight, it's a great example in my view, who has a booth here. They are an extra layer for automations. They would add AI solutions that would, again, generate new insights that you would want to consider when you calculate your risk. You used to do it manually. You have all of these different systems and technologies and automations that you need upfront to map and then remap along the way to constantly be certain that your C-levels, that your leadership can trust this output and make strategic business decisions based on it. And in my view, it's maybe the toughest challenge when it's a robust, global, complex organization, for example, like eToro.
When you think about, like we talked about, the different types of organizations and institutions and the different resources they have, can we talk about, we've touched on it, but more about the different aspects of transaction monitoring? Are there aspects that are easier to build in-house versus third-party solutions?
Yeah.
Maybe touch a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I think it's really case-by-case thing. For example, internally, I would say it's by far better to build something like I just described that collects data from internal systems, because for me to bring a vendor and get him permissions to all of these internal systems, it's a nightmare. It won't happen. Like, I would need to chase so many people and it won't work. I can work with my internal AI automations team, the development team, however, in our company it's called BizOps. They already have the understanding of the internal systems, they know the people. So for example, to consolidate data from multiple systems and apply AI, I would build it internally. On screening, going out to the internet, verifying faces or applying some heavy technology that requires maintenance and development based on the latest released model, language model, or to ensure it's efficient also in terms of cost. This is usually a better to purchase, because these companies, like all the companies participate today, that's what they do all day. They just chase the latest trends. They are familiar with the best practices in the industry. It's very helpful to gather benchmarks and apply it on your challenge. That's at least in my view the differentiation I would make.
Yes, I think, I mean, this is, I've seen this question play out over the course of my career, not only specific to AI, but with AI, it's becoming more interesting. So I'll touch on that. But, you know, the decision to go vendor versus in-house is something that, you know, a lot of the firms grapple with. In my experience, the larger banks, increasingly so, have gone the route of customized solutions, primarily because there's different advantages to doing so, right? You have ability to customize for your organization, especially as you increase in size and your complexity, the ability to absorb different organizations and their systems and to do so with your own parameters and your own timing is more flexible when you're building your solution in-house. It also gives you better data ownership and stewardship, right? Especially with complex and sensitive data, you have better ability to manage your data. And in some cases, your internal policies may prevent you from giving that data to a vendor, even if you think the vendor solution may be right? Then with the smaller firms, they have gone with vendor solutions because you have obviously the cost efficiency, but also the ability to stay middle of the pack. You don't have to compete with whether your solution is going to be the right one or the permitted one, because you know that the vendor solution is meeting industry expectations. So you have that dichotomy of the size and the scale, but I think interestingly where I'm seeing the migration is really more towards a hybrid approach. And what I mean by that hybrid approach is customization when the differentiation is warranted and when you really can differentiate yourself in the market with the customization you're doing, and using the vendor solutions as an acceleration. And AI is a very important example for that type of acceleration, where firms are opting for AI on a service basis instead of becoming AI shops themselves, because they know that they cannot have the full talent that the market is commanding right now. So hiring the right firms to have that type of AI capability built into their customized solutions is something I've seen increasingly happen. One specific area where I see this more than not is really on the behavioral aspect of transaction monitoring that AI accelerates. AI's ability to traverse large amounts of data and come up with behavioral patterns is something that the industry players have done a lot of work in, and the closed cloud-based solutions lend themselves to being able to work in closed environments. So that's where I'm seeing more trends of that hybrid model.
And I would just add just one very simple comment again. You can compare the cost and timeline like every, I don't know, common project management practice. You can really try to break it down and say, okay, in-house, I do have or do not have the ability to develop it myself. If I do have, how much it would cost. A company that, for example, has an external workforce that costs quarter of the cost in the headquarters location, for example, should consider these kind of things. And it's useful to do a request for proposal, like an RFP, and then to list in this RFP what you need, work with your internal teams, bring one or two competitors, vendors, and then to see who, even if possible, run a quick POC to may the best player win. But yeah, simple application of something like that can help a lot to make better decisions and not to go to rabbit holes. It's so easy, to, yeah, let's do that. And then after 1 or 2 years, you realize it doesn't work well enough, and it's very unfortunate. So again, I will emphasize to try to run these quick checks upfront and make wise decisions.
We didn't talk about this earlier, but I have a question that you guys prompted, which is, when we use large language models and some of the enterprise ChatGPT, we're told it can't learn your information and tell somebody else, right? It's sandboxed, and across all of these different AI agents, like, should we as market participants trust them? Like, is that like
The popular language models, not necessarily, at least to my understanding. But there are some, even like one company, there are some companies that build their language models for enterprises. And all the architecture is like to demonstrate how safe it is and how it is tailored, to your like decision making and governance. But then you may lose the latest ChatGPT feature or something like that. Again, hybrid or like multi-hybrid, it's not hybrid, multi-dimensional kind of structure. When also it's not only the trust, it's some models would cost much more for simple use cases that you don't want to invest so much money. So if you can utilize a simple, not that complex and smart language model for a simple use case, it's also important to do that. And then you should consider the security, the cost efficiency, and the time to market, how complex it is to implement or not.
Understood.
Well, I've been on the other end of that, in a very highly regulated industry and with a bank that had very, sort of I would say conservative requirements around data privacy and cyber considerations. There is definitely a movement towards having closed cloud solutions for data management. I know they're working with vendors, banks are working with their vendors like Microsoft and others to create those type of environments, because I think in embedding AI into your day-to-day work is no longer an option. It's an actual requirement. So enabling ways to do that in the more, risk-averse way is what I have seen. Now, with that said, I think the biggest concept I've seen implemented is trust but verify. So a lot of, testing and parameters go into ensuring that that privacy and that data protection is maintained, because we live in an environment where cyber and related technology risks are so high, and data leakage is, we hear cases of this all the time, where banks are managing events of data loss. So even within the environment, there's external threats that you have to manage. But with those external threats, what I really see is having the right controls and having the right containment options so that you can use LLM and the cloud computing capabilities more effectively.
So now we're an organization that's gone through this process, listened to your advice, implemented what we hope is going to work. What's the role of humans? What do we do with our people now?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to make it very clear. AI is not replacing humans. It's a false understanding, I think, of the capabilities of the technology. Also, especially in the area of compliance for financial services, it's so sensitive. And even for the sake of like risk measures, you want to have a human in the loop, almost always. Some technical stuff that can be done by AI should definitely be automated and prepare the data as much as possible for the human to review. This is how it usually works, and I think it's similar in legal AI solutions, for example. Like, you don't want AI to send out the revised agreement. You want it to prepare it for you with all the reasoning, why I think this comment is irrelevant and why I would switch this clause with this phrase, da, 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 da. And then you want someone, the liable person eventually. AI is not liable entity for regulators yet, humans are. So I think that's like how I would differentiate between the two and just make it clear that AI and humans should be friends, not enemies.
I would, I'll say something slightly controversial. I don't think AI replaces humans, but AI certainly is here to replace certain human activities. Yeah, sure. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think when well managed, it can actually really increase productivity, but at the same time also give, basically expand the ability for the humans involved to do a lot more. So in my view, if used as a productivity tool, it can really help scale. But to answer your question, the humans in the loop, right? I think there's a tiering, and we're seeing this happen. We read about it in the news every day, which is what are the skills of tomorrow that not only the people joining the workforce need to learn, but the people that are in the workforce need to make themselves savvy on. So I think that when you think about transaction monitoring and human in the loop, there's certainly all of the data, the large language models are helping solve and manage, and that data management will become more easier. The human activity associated with that therefore becomes easier, faster, and more reliable. But where the humans stay in the loop is where the anomalies come in and the behavioral patterns that AI is detecting. AI can have a predictive view on what the patterns predict and what the data is indicating, but to make sense of that in the context of the compliance program that we talked about, and more importantly, risk-taking, that's where we really see the humans in the loop being effective. And then the second area where I'd certainly think that humans play a big role is the expert investigation standpoint and the connectivity to other risks. So when you see certain events or transactions materialize, how do they connect to the broader risk appetite? And what could be emerging risks coming as a result of some of them being realized is where human analysis and the context can be very, very supportive.
So I think this brings us to the question of explainability and the regulatory trust, right? So it sounds like humans have a role there. We talked earlier, there have been cases where, lawyers have cited cases in briefs and either the other side or the judge has said, well, this case doesn't exist, right? It was hallucinated, made up. How do we deal with that in the context of transaction monitoring where there's millions, thousands of transactions that we're trusting AI to go through and hoping that it doesn't hallucinate either a false positive or it misses something or it says that all three of us are, on some sanctions list and now we can't bank anymore. So.
Yeah. So Shweta and I actually discussed it and agreed that I think in this specific area of compliance and trying to satisfy regulatory needs or requirements, the regulator would prioritize in top priority the intent. Like they want to see that you take it seriously. You did the research of what your business activities are and what are the derived regulatory obligations. Only by that, to show this mapping in a very thorough and professional way, it's very impressive and important. Then you can show them, listen, because I have this business activity in this area, that was my first priority. This is why that's where I started. And then these are the, again, KPIs I decided to measure in order to know that what I'm doing is good or it's better or less good than what I used to do manually, etc. So I think just as a general statement, in our industry, super important to tell this story from beginning till end very thoroughly, to document everything. This would be first. And second, again, to decide how you do quality assurance. To say, okay, if usually, statistically, I was able to detect this amount of cases out of Y amount of activity records in the last 5-10 years, let's see how AI does that. Let's see if statistically it makes sense, if it's linear correlation or not. In some cases, it's not correlated. Like some detections that humans will be able to make, machines won't be able to do, and vice versa. So I think what I would suggest is to structure the storytelling, the references, the evidences, and even though you would still have a black box component to it, because that's the nature of language models, the regulator will appreciate, or auditors will appreciate it a lot, and it will help you to be sure that at least in comparison to what you used to do, you are now more effective, not less accurate, and robust enough to show that this technology is effective.
Certainly. I mean, I think when we think about explainability, what do we really mean? What are we saying, right? Is it explainability has somehow come up as a concept because of AI? Not really, right? Because model validation existed well before any of this, and the expectations around that existed well before that from a regulatory standpoint. So when we talk about explainability, particularly in the case of AI, we're talking about a shift from model validation to a model agnostic viewpoint, which can demonstrate that there is auditability in the decision making that was facilitated using artificial intelligence. So there's obviously, there's new emerging technology about that to help with that type of explainability. Those model agnostic techniques, whether they be SHAP or LIME, there are different techniques that are being used to explore not so much the what, which decision was made, but rather the why. How did AI arrive at that decision? What led to that, decision or conclusion that the AI model came up with? And there, pairing it to your point, pairing it with the right governance and the right principles is very, very paramount. Really being able to explain to the regulators the decision making and the process whereby which it was made, and most importantly, the back testing that you're doing in your AI model is what the regulators look for. After having sat in the room with almost all the regulatory authorities on AI a number of times, their primary question on this topic is, how did the AI model interact with the human in the loop? Where were all the touch points where the human was evaluating the decisions made? And did the AI model have the ability to make a decision on its own? In some cases, the answer is yes. For example, credit risk decisions for credit cards based on profiles, that's a decision that, a lot of times AI is making, and that's very explainable because the parameters are very black and white. Transaction monitoring, where you may have certain suspicious transactions based and behavioral patterns that need to be explained, there you may need human in the loop to better explain the decision that was made on the basis of that analysis. So I think explainability is very key to the regulatory trust that we're talking about, because that trust is built on the premise that firms using AI are doing so responsibly.
And by the way, remember, regulators are humans, exactly like us. Like many times, they struggle to interpret their own textual regulation. Like they really take time to.
But now they have AI to help them.
Yeah, exactly. So they struggle with the same thing. Like they're saying to myself, "Oh, okay, we will use AI to understand what we need to ask everyone to do." But they struggle as well with this kind of stuff. So they can relate very easily to these kind of challenges because, as you said, it's not anymore a privilege. Like it's a must-have kind of solution to have. And yeah, I would just suggest to remember that always.
So that's great. I think now might be time to open it to questions from the audience.
Hi, this is a question for both Avner and Shweta. There was a question that was asked about, whether you should use a third-party tool or build something in-house, and you gave a very descriptive answer. Thank you. My question is now, in the context of AI, if you look at the fact, let's say there's a system and there's a workflow. There are 5 different blocks. Previously, you would have had a third-party vendor say, okay, we can do number 4. And somebody else say we can do number 2. But for large organizations, like my bank, it's because there are so many data streams, there's a lot for each component to stitch it into the workflow. It's very humongous. Sometimes you may think, okay, let me just do it in-house, right? Because of that. But in the context of AI, when you introduce the different components, if we have 2 different AI models working, for number 3 and number 4, those AI models can actually do that stitching. They can talk to each other and they can pass that information.
Yeah. So
what do you have to say about that?
Yeah. So thanks a lot for the question. There is it's more technical, but there is a new standard called MCP, which is the data standard for AI agents to communicate with each other. And that was not exist, I think, a year ago. I think it was Anthropic who created it. Like one of the main language models actually stepped forward and said to the world, listen, we invented, it's like Fix in trading. It's like, or other financial services like probably Swift for payments, okay? So it's how all the banks can communicate with each other. I think if you would normalize earlier systems internally to MCP, and only then involve external AI solutions, then the sky's the limit. The space is the limit, like the stars. Because then it actually can interpret in the same format all different systems and automate things and suggest you things and be efficient. Otherwise, as I said before, I would be super careful to purchase external technology before I'm sure how I can overcome this very challenging point that you raised.
I fully commiserate with the challenge that you noted, particularly for large banks, because, you know, as you said, there are many facets, many parts to the process, right? And while you're busy automating one in a silo, the other one may not be available through the same vendor or may not be possible through the same in-house solution you're building. And as a part of being a large bank, as I was saying, you have limitations on how you can engage with external vendors and external solutions, so you may not be ready to engage with that industry standard yet. So certainly the challenge is real, but I think to your point, one area where I have seen some evolution on this front is really in better usage of agentic AI. Having the right agentic flow and the usage of the bots to talk to each other and having the simple bot mechanism to set up a process that's end-to-end has been a more easily deployable solution in a more highly regulated environment. But a very key factor to that is a point that we were talking about before, which is, do you have that end-to-end view, and do you have that stakeholder agreement to bring the different parts of the process together? Even if you think about transaction monitoring, right? Data ingestion and integration to then the risk profiling. You need the data teams to set up and work with the KYC teams. You need the KYC teams to then work with the compliance officers. So you need that agreement for the solution and the life cycle that you will build in order for it to be successful. And that really goes back to the challenge at hand in this space, in my view.
Hi, this question is for both Shweta and Avner. So this is on the AI replacing the humans, right? So Avner, you kind of mentioned that AI will never replace humans, and Shweta kind of mentioned it will replace some of the human activities, right? But again, it depends on the organization size, right? If it's a large organization, you know, for us to complete the end-to-end process, you'll have various departments involved, right? And coming back to Shweta's point, so yes, it may take some of the activities performed by one of the departments, which means we have to reduce the workforce from that department. So in that case, for that department specifically, yes, it is replacing the humans, right? But end-to-end flow, probably AI will not replace humans 100%. But again, a small organization, so where you have maybe less number of people, one person working on 10 different activities in entire, maybe 15, 20 activities in that end-to-end process, right? In that case, yes, you will not reduce the workforce, but probably, you use some models or agentic framework to, increase the turnaround time of the activity that you do, right? So what do you say about percentage of reducing the activities or reducing the workforce?
Yeah, so I think it's actually a trend in the whole AI industry, because I think interesting if you would agree, Shweta. I think humans becomes more like supervisors versus like technical workers, like repetitive tasks workers. And it's true it happened in the industrial revolution, so it happens again now. And yes, totally. If now, for example, size matters a lot, to your question, and if it's a small hedge firm that execute $5 billion trading a year and onboard only big institutions once every few months, it's one thing. Probably you don't need AI at all. If it's a company like I'm working for with such high volume and complexity, you must use AI. And then I think the areas where you want to start with is where the manual labor is the heaviest. If, for example, you need 100, 200, 500 people to resolve cases manually of client registrations or document submissions or requests for profile updates or money movements, etc., you can cut a lot of this workforce. You won't be able to replace this, let's call it 10-20% of this workforce, which would be the domain experts. This workforce must be very knowledgeable constantly, be on top of the evolution in this area, and that's something that I don't think AI will be able to replace anytime soon.
I do agree with everything you said. The only quick remark I would add to that is there is an interesting concept I've seen, which is promising too much to AI and not managing it well. And what I mean by that is if you take an example of a large bank, which I've seen happen, one division used one AI solution to do client documentation. Another division used a completely different solution. Both were using AI, both had efficiency targets that were met, but collectively, if they had agreed on a singular solution, they would have had more efficiencies. And that's where that role of chief AI officers is really becoming, I think, the right norm, because you need to be strategic about the solutioning. To your point, I do think that there is an efficiency to be gained on both the workflow and the workforce, if done right, but that done right part is really the more important point.
It also depends on where it is coming from, right?
Exactly.
So this is coming from enterprise versus
Individual divisions, exactly.
Yes, hi. I'm struggling on how to ask this question, but we're working with an AI company, and we're going to be using their their learning models, right? If a regulator comes in, how much documentation do they expect the company to have, right? Like if they're building the learning model, right? And do they have to share exactly how they built that and how much information is in there? I'm struggling with that, and how much is that the regulator expects you to have?
I'm very excited to answer that question because it universally applies to really everybody. No such thing as enough documentation when it comes to regulators.
Like that.
I say that, but I'll qualify my answer. The regulators look to documentation to independently review and understand better what it is that a firm is building. So think of documentation as their tool to help them enable better oversight that they want to provide. So from that perspective, they prefer more documentation than less. However, I have to qualify that by saying that they don't expect documentation for the sake of it. So if it is just procedural documentation but not getting into the actual governance, the principles, the parameters of the model, the decision making, and the back testing, then it's kind of missing the point. And that's what I see a lot with AI particularly, because a lot of the documentation is coming not with the support from the second line. It doesn't always have that risk and compliance viewpoint embedded. You have the risk and compliance policies at the very high level, and then you have model-specific documentation about the technology. But at times, those documents don't talk to each other. And that's where I see the regulators struggle and ask a lot of questions. Where I see the regulators have a more positive reaction is when your policy is embedded in your model documentation to show how it has been applied. And that really is where I think the real differentiation comes into place, where your policy documents can speak to the procedural model-specific documentation, and you can backtrack that this is how the principles were applied in the case of this model. Tiering, validation, all of those considerations are key. Right? If something goes unvalidated, why? If it was tiered a certain way, why? If there were certain overlays, why were they placed? And what sort of judgment went into those overlays? Those are the type of decisions that they want to see documented well.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that I'm facing the same challenge. I'm working with many vendors, and I'm constantly chasing them to tailor their documentation to me. Because always what at least we built in eToro is custom. We're a very odd kind of animal in this jungle. So I think if we go back to the beginning of the discussion, you well define upfront the KPIs you want to monitor, and it makes sense, it's coherent. You explain why these regulatory obligations resulted in these KPIs, applying this kind of a solution. The regulator won't go and tell you, show me the algorithm, log. They are not capable to understand these things. What they can understand is whether the person in front of them is serious, is committed, is like investing seriously in this area, and if he's structured enough to build something in terms of storytelling that they can understand and count on. So if, for example, let's assume your AI company, the AI company you're talking about is transaction monitoring, given you will meet the regulator and you will tell them, this is the mapping of the business activities we are covering. Derived from that, these are the obligations that we have in order to comply with you guys. Then, in order to do that, we created this request for proposal, which details exactly what kind of detections are required, even in high level. Like every time a person trades more than, abnormal size of deposit withdrawals, just simple example like that, we know that we must detect that and take care of it. And then when we detect something like that, which stakeholders in the company should be noticed, and how we resolve and escalate and report to you guys the SARS. If they will see that, they will be very happy. That's at least from my own experience. And the challenge to pick a vendor that is, and it's very challenging. I don't have many of these vendors available and capable enough to provide you this clarity in a good enough way to serve your storytelling to the regulator or auditor, and then to overcome this scrutiny again and again and again.
Well, I think we're out of time, but if there's one quick question, I think back there.
So this is just taking off on Avner's point, where you spoke about agents talking to each other and things like that. How do you envision a standardized agentic message format, which would be explainable, and what would be part of that content there, the payload, which would then be explainable to, which would help you later in terms of, downstream actions to make it auditable, explainable across firms, because it's going to happen from what you're saying that they're all going to be talking to each other, and who's going to make that policy? It can't be Claude, it can't be Anthropic. Or is it them in coordination with the industry, or are the regulators going to get involved? Just asking this as an open question.
Yeah, so I don't think I know the definite answer. I can tell you what I believe will happen. But I think from what I see, the MCP is by far the most used and common standard in order to enable perfect synchronization between AI agents from different language models, etc. This is kind of the bridge between them all. So I think this trend will proceed and will just get stronger and stronger. But I'm going back again to the storytelling piece. Let's make a very clear differentiation between technology architecture and compliance program architecture. Both are very relevant. The regulator probably won't care or understand the technology architecture, how this, MCP agent is authenticating the access to this API. Like they don't care about this stuff. What they would want to see is that you mapped correctly all the different data formats that you need to support, and that you probably use the relevant models per use case. For example, if it's a machine learning use case, it's more ideal and efficient, or a language model for reasoning, as we discussed before. If they will see that you did this mapping and apply this reasoning and build this compliance program architecture in this manner, again, I believe that they will be very impressed. And even if it's not perfect, they will be very considerable and with high tolerance to support you to continue this sentiment, because that's what everybody are trying to do. I hope it helps.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think you guys can now go to lunch.
Serge, thank you very much for the moderation.
Thank you, Serge.